So welcome everyone. My name is David Izraelowitz. I'm a county councilor in Los Alamos, New Mexico, and also the ECA treasurer. I'm honored to moderate a conversation among our distinguished participants this afternoon. Each of our panelists brings a unique perspective and experience to a complex, multifaceted issue critical to the success of our mission. Developing the future EM workforce is a concern with immediate as well as 20-year-long planning horizons. I can't think of a problem more wide-ranging and bewildering than retaining mid-career professionals while also recruiting fresh talent from university and apprenticeship programs, while also motivating elementary grade kids to actually enjoy fractions. So we're going to go directly to a Q&A format. We put a set of questions to motivate and focus our discussion, and I will kind of focus the discussion on one participant, but then look forward to further commentary by the rest of the panel. So before we get started, let me introduce our panel. To my far right, we have Myrna Redfield. She's the president and CEO and program manager of the Four Rivers Nuclear Partnership in Paducah, Kentucky. Next, we have John Eschenberg. He's the president of the Central Plateau Cleanup Company at the Hanford site. Then we have Kristen Ellis, Director for Regulatory, Intergovernmental, and Stakeholder Engagement at DOE-EM. And then J.J. Chavez, he's a council member of the city of Carlsbad and also on the ECA Executive Board. So I'd like to start with a question for Kristen. There was a very interesting and I would say energetic workforce summit earlier this week discussing the needs for the EM workforce pipeline. Could you summarize a little bit what came out of that meeting that would be interesting for our panel to hear about? And then I'd like to hear maybe some things that might resonate with the rest of the panel.
Okay.
So, Kristen.
And since you were in the room for that, I may ask you at the end if I summarized it properly. It was a great conversation, and a much smaller room than this one, which meant the temperature was a little better, but maybe that's a personal bias. And really, this conversation for the Workforce Summit came out of a conversation earlier this year at the Waste Management Symposia, where Ike was talking with a group from the Energy Communities Alliance, and that it was quickly evident that workforce is an issue that every part of the industry is dealing with, both the federal side, the state side, local, contractor, and I would say generally industry-wide, not just specialized to our industry. In recognizing that we have so many different issues, particularly prevalent in our industry as well, we could sit and come up with 50 or 60 things that we want to fix. And with so many sites across the complex, incorporating each individual site perspective was also very challenging. So never one to, we tried to winnow down the universe a little bit. And so that conversation we had earlier in the week, we took 4 of our sites across the complex, Hanford, Savannah River, Oak Ridge, and Idaho, to kind of highlight maybe there's some specific things that each of those sites are doing that would be an opportunity for other sites to benefit from. And we started kind of thinking about this from the immediate and midterm and longer term perspective. Short term meaning, what can we do to move the needle and make some changes in the next 18 months? And I think really the easiest option there would be changes in our contract structure. And then as we kind of talk midterm more, maybe it's bolstering or building out or starting anew or starting from scratch. Some potential pipeline programs using our university partners, and we have a lot of great examples there already in place across the complex, and kind of building those out. And then for the longer term, I think STEM is one of those terms that means everything to everybody. I saw an email from DOE earlier this month. They're calling it STEMtember, which is kind of hard to say, but I guess it's cute for social media purposes. But recognizing that the longer term impact of thinking about K through 12 outreach right now and capturing the imagination of middle schoolers who haven't settled into a path. And not being wed to the path, you have to end up with a PhD in nuclear engineering. You know, there's a lot of viable trade apprentice and other opportunities that don't require you to go to school for 8 years. And so, but recognizing also, if we continue to, if we don't start making changes in the K through 12 environment, we're going to be having the same conversation we're having now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now. I'll repeat the statistics that Ike used this morning. I've used them several times as well. I'll lead with the big one: 15 employees under the age of 30 in a federal workforce of 1,200. That, you know, we can't hope to be successful 20 years from now with that number in place. And, you know, recognizing also that, you know, a fully successful workforce is going to require a variety of degrees, a variety of perspectives, a variety of backgrounds, and so diversity and inclusion are going to be part of all of those discussions moving forward. Also recognizing that, you know, nothing can be done in a day. I think the conversation was fantastic, very engaging from all the participants that we did have in the room, and that included some university partners, local government board members from ECA, participants from FCOG. That was the first conversation though, and so from the list of fantastic ideas, I think we're going to take some near-term action, and I'm looking forward to our next venue where we can talk about what came out of that conversation this week. Anything to add from that, David, since you were there also?
No, I think you summarized it well. What struck me is the different time constants that we're dealing with. And some things are much longer than any contractual agreement that we can. So we really need our contractors, our feds, and our communities to really think long-term about this issue, because some of these are long-term, require long-term answers.
Yes.
So I'd like to open it up if there are others that would like to comment on just general issues related to workforce, or we'll go to the next question. So my next question is for John, and I'd encourage you to say a little bit about yourself. You know, we dispense with kind of formal introductions, so if you would like to say a little bit about your background. So John, can you start and tell us what workforce projects underway you are most excited about? We'll start with John and then maybe circle around.
Okay, all right, thanks. Thanks for the question, and good afternoon to everybody. So yeah, John Ischenberg with Central Plateau Cleanup Company. Almost feels like I need to make an introduction to the company because it's one of the newest awards in the DOE complex. We're principally responsible for reducing risk along the river corridor in the Central Plateau on the Hanford site. Takes a wide range of attack approaches, significant work in groundwater and soil treatments. A lot of risk remains in the Central Plateau, and we're working to reduce our material at risk by putting it in a safer, longer-term storage configuration. Company about 2,000 employees all in. Budget's about $550 million a year that runs through our books. So we're one of 6 prime contractors on the Hanford site. So that's probably all I'll say about the company. I think my remarks, and I hope I don't infringe on my colleagues too much here, but I'll probably speak for the broader site and our broader challenge. And so I'll just tag off what Christina said earlier. We are working very hard. All of the leadership across the Hanford site is working very hard to build the next generation of our workforce. And we know that's a uniform problem, not only in our market, but across the nuclear industry and industry at large. We know that, and we're doing all the things that we know to do with engaging with universities, both for us locally, it's called the Columbia Basin College, which is a 2-year technical school, but they also do have 4-year degree offerings, and then Washington State University, which is also got a large campus in the Tri-Cities next to the Hanford site. So we work with the university leadership, and they actually, many of our employees are adjunct staff to these institutions, and we've been able to help design the curriculums and the programs of record to really suit our needs. And academia has been very, very supportive of those efforts, and we've got a really good relationship there. So, you know, once we've fortified and worked with our partners in academia to suit our needs, then we transitioned into developing cooperative employment programs and then more of the classic internship programs. The cooperative employment programs for us, we'll hire the kids through the whole summer. They can work spring break, they can work fall break. And we've seen, we call it our capture rate. Our capture rate of cooperative students or cooperative employment opportunities, our capture rate, our retention rate is very, very high. Whereas our capture rate for just a classical intern is pretty low. Ordinarily, we would get somewhere between 30 to 50 interns per year. My last year with my previous company, Washington River Protection Solutions, classically we would have 50 students or 50 interns every year. We really struggled to get 30. We struggled to generate a level of interest in our mission and in our company, which was insightful to me. So we're really focused probably more on the cooperative employment opportunity. Not going to abandon interns yet, but when you look at it as capture rate, you know, your input, energy, your time, you know, how much of that's really paying off. And cooperative employment is a better way for us to go. One of the other things we've leveraged, and I'm sure many of you have too, is the Skills Bridge program. It is a fantastic program which allows you to onboard service members for the last 6 months of their hitch. So they fulfill the commitment to the country, and really we can onboard them, and it works very well. We've signed the agreement with the Defense Department. So Central Plateau Closure Company, veterans make up 18% of our workforce, and we're very high on hiring veterans because, as you all know, I mean, they assimilate very quickly into whatever your needs are to support the mission. So, you know, my counsel would be, you know, think about the Skills Bridge program. One of the challenges on the Hanford site, and even for all of us in this room, we're all fishing from the same pond here. And we're, you know, hiring somebody from my colleagues, Val or Bob or any of the others, Wes, that's a sort of a short-term solution. It doesn't help us. It really hurts the other companies. It raises the collective salary base to do the mission. So it's just not a recipe for success, and fishing from the same pond is not going to work, and we all know that. The leadership on the Hanford site gets together. We're working this as one team because I think there's certainly strength in numbers. Just a couple of other thoughts here. You know, when we talk about cooperative employment and intern experiences, you know, we classically think about the STEM fields. And why that's important, you know, a large majority of our professional staff members are in accounting, financing, legal, and others. So our recruiting efforts from a cooperative employment perspective are very, very broad, very wide. But that leads me to, because I never want to forget about this segment of our workforce because they're the most important segment, and that's the people who are closest to the work. And it's our friends in the metal trades and the building trades. We are not quite where we need to be on the Hanford site. And other sites, Oak Ridge in particular and others, have leveraged what's called the Apprenticeship Readiness Program. It's a wonderful program. It's financially supported. I think it's intended to focus on underserved communities, minorities, women, because it turns out women are really, really good welders. They're way better than men. And I can weld, and so I can appreciate that. So, you know, we need not to forget about, you know, that pathway and that pipeline by way of the apprenticeship readiness program. It's been, again, it's been used successfully, but on the Hanford side, I think that it's a good opportunity for us here to grow that segment of our workforce. And I guess, if you would just bear with me here for a minute, I think, me personally, where I've come to is, in terms of attracting the next generation of our workforce, everybody's going after the college kids. You know, we focus a lot on STEM and the STEM students in Delta high schools, and that's fine. But, you know, the STEM fields aren't the only people we're gonna need. I mean, they're just not. But going after these kids when they're in their late teens, it's too late. And so our focus through STEM and STEM Like Me, and in the state of Washington, it's called Career Connect Washington. In the state of Tennessee, under then Governor Haslam, it was called the Drive to 55. And those numbers just mean, objectively, you know, you want 80% of the graduates from high school to go into a field of study or another institution where 80% of them have some post-secondary credential, whether it be a welding certificate, whether it be a law degree or other. You know, that's what Career Connect Washington does. And they've broken it down into 8 different market segments, and it's very future-looking. Everything from manufacturing, clean manufacturing, to clean energy. So there's a range of market sectors. So I think, you know, what the communities and our colleagues in the state and local governments, I think that's an opportunity for your voices to be heard and affect policy at a state level. And my last point, I think, is we've got to get to these kids in elementary and 7th and the 8th grade. And it's less about getting to the kids and getting the kids interested in our line of work, and it's more about convincing their parents that it's okay for their son or daughter not to seek a four-year, you know, traditional college diploma, and instead they can serve the needs of industry and the needs of this country in a much different way. They will never starve, they'll make a very good living for their family, and they'll be very happy taxpayers. So what I have seen now, having hopped around to a bunch of different communities in a bunch of different states, we've seen probably the greatest return on our investment when we really focus on 7th and 8th graders, and it's the mom and dads of those 7th and 8th graders, to reassure them that their son or daughter will be just fine, to reassure them that irrespective of where they wish to go in industry, whether it be manufacturing or the nuclear industry or other, manufacturing is a clean, highly technical, very safe part of our industry. And most parents may not fully appreciate that. You know, they tend to think about what a textile mill was in 1975. You know, it was dark and it was loud, non-technical, you know, very labor intensive. It's not like that anymore. So those are the kind of messages that we're focused on. Those are the kind of initiatives we got going on to drive this collective solution, because again, fishing from the same pond is just not going to get us where we need to be.
Okay. Thank you, David. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hi, my name is Mirna Espinosa Redfield, like David said earlier. I work for Four Rivers Nuclear Partnership. I'm the program manager. We are the deactivation and remediation contractor for the Department of Energy at Paducah. I want to take a moment and just, as David asked, to give you a little bit of background of how I got to DOE. Just want to mention that because I started with DOE in 1991, and the way I got to DOE was through recruitment. DOE in the 1990s, in the late 1990s, they used to go to Puerto Rico and trying to recruit engineers to bring to Oak Ridge to be interns. So I went on to an interview while I was still in college, my last year, and it was supposed to be an intern in Oak Ridge. I'm not sure how my papers got lost, but my papers ended up in Paducah. And I got called for an interview at Paducah to be a safety engineer. So they called me, I came to Paducah and had the interview, and then I was offered the job. So before I left college, I already knew that I was gonna be working for the Department of Energy at Paducah. So I work as a Fed for approximately 12 and a half years, and then I have been a contractor ever since. I'm currently at Paducah, so altogether, I've been working the DOE mission 31 years, and in different capacities as a Fed, and then now as a contractor. So this is really important because it's something that back then, as I was saying, folks younger than 30, I was in that group. And I can say that today I am not in that group anymore. So somebody is gonna have to come behind us, the ones that are getting ready to start the retirement time frame. Somebody's gonna have to come behind us and take over where we're leaving it. So it's really important. So going back to the question that David asked, what is a project that is underway, a workforce project that is underway that I'm most excited about? I have to say that it is the training that we just completed. Well, we're in the process of almost completing this training, but the training for union RATEX. And the reason why this is so important for us is because it's an example of how partnership can really work. We have an issue at like every other site throughout the complex. We have a lot of attrition, and the percentage is around 10%. It's around average. Everybody is experiencing that. Some other sites are experiencing higher. But there's an area that we have been experiencing a much higher attrition, and it is RATEX. There for a while, we were losing 1 RATEC a day. Today, while we were in this meeting, I just got another notification, another RATEC left. So that was something that I discussed with the president of our union. This is the USW 550 at Paducah. We talked about this issue, and in collaboration with their international office, they had already developed a training that they had just finished at Portsmouth, which is another example of lessons learned from another site, which Portsmouth and Paducah, we're talking all the time. So we knew that training had been completed there, so we requested that training be considered to be brought to Paducah. We were able to, in partnership with the local community and technical college, get them to basically endorse the process as well. So they gave credit to these local residents for taking this class. And then they also offered free of charge using their facilities. So we have been, since the early April timeframe, we were training these, there were 20 is a team of 20 people that were selected to go through this training. They have taken a test. There was a base test that they had to pass, and we had close to a 90% pass rate. And I am happy to inform that although they're not 100% completed with the course, they're done with that. Given that they passed that test, they're ready to be considered to be junior RATEX. And on Monday, we're going to have 17 of those people start employment at the site. So that is a clear example of how partnering together, working with the union, working with local universities, how you can just fill those gaps that we all are experiencing. One key thing is a lot of the RATEX that are leaving our site, our attrition rate there, as I said, it was much higher. It was close to 20%. A lot of those RATEX are going to other sites. Like John just mentioned, they're just being offered better benefits. And because of that, then we continue to, everybody's needing new RATEX. So just want to mention here, we have 17 new ones. There are union RATEX that are starting here. So if you need RATEX, please let's talk after this conference, and we'll make sure that you can also train yours so that you can leave ours in Paducah. So that we, so thank you.
So before we go to and JJ, I'm going to ask you the next question, but I'm going to take a minute first. First of all,
before you do that, I wanted to make him
yes.
answer this one too.
Sure.
We had a side conversation, I think it was just yesterday. This week's been a little bit of a blur. I know in Carlsbad you are in the process of standing up a similar kind of university partnership. I would love for you to tell us about that a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure, no problem. Well, my name is JJ Chavez, City Councilor for City Carlsbad. We're home of the WIP site. We're a unique facility, just for the simple fact is we have the Delaware Basin, or the Permian Basin, which is oil filled, so we support 40% of the state's revenue and 80% of the education budget. So we actually have a problem with, how do I say it? Stealing from Peter to pay Paul. Going to the oil field, going to different industries. So we went to our local university, which was a branch of a university in New Mexico. We asked for similarity programs, RadCon techs, electricians, and we didn't get the answer we wanted, is a good way to say it. So we decided and formed our own committee, and we went to the state legislator, to the state senators and state representatives, and we are no longer part of the university, so we are now our own independent college for our community, local community that was founded by our local mayor, our local governors, so it actually worked out pretty well. So now, basically, as a local community, we can now, I should say, dictate what our local community needs. So we are gonna start up our own apprenticeships with RadCon, electricians, mechanics. So it's no longer what the university wants, it's more what does our local community want and what do we need locally. It's even gone to the fact that we've met with our DOE contractor on site, our DOE and our contractor and our local college president, and of course the mayor and myself, and we had meetings on how do we continue this forward and how do we get our kids going in the programs. And we've actually gonna start, hopefully pretty soon, its own training center. We've come up with different names. One name we've come up with is 2150 Training Center, because WIP is 2,150 feet in the underground. So we named it the 21. We're thinking about naming it the 2150 Training Center, so always a talking point. So we're looking at all these other panelists on here, so great ideas, and we're headed that direction because we know the industry we have is very complex, and it's not only us, but it's our local community as well, because we got young kids in our industry that are getting certified as electricians or mechanics and are leaving to the oil field. So as long as we can keep them and maintain them and train our workforce at our local community college now, not university, we can always keep picking, and we don't have to keep stealing.
Yeah. Thank you
Great.
for that addition.
So what I wanted to do is break the fourth wall for given your emphasis on internships, and I wanted to just ask the audience, how many of us had a summer position or a co-op position that really directed our further career? And that's certainly the case for me. And I see a fair number of them that it was really life-changing, and we didn't quite talk about that, but that seems on Tuesday. But that seems a piece of the puzzle that we should emphasize.
And I'm really interested. I'll probably be bugging John after this session to understand a little bit more about this concept of what cooperative experience or whatever. That's a new one for me, so I'll get it right next time. But there was a conversation in the discussion on Tuesday, and I believe they called it an immersive educational approach. And it was one of the HBCUs that we have a partnership with in Tennessee. And this wasn't an example from us. I think it was Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they ventured into a formal agreement with the college wherein they identify a group of students that enter into this formal agreement. And they have mentors from the company, individual people that stay with them through the college process. And a lot of these students maybe are getting extra resources about understanding what's involved in being successful in graduating from college. And then at the time of graduation, they have a commitment, both from Blue Cross Blue Shield, and also they have provided a contractual commitment that they are going to work for 3 years with Blue Cross and Blue Shield. And they're therefore creating their own pipeline, their own private pipeline through a college. And I think that idea has some real potential. And kind of like the next step for maybe some of these apprenticeship programs or these existing academic relationships that we're starting to see pop up across the enterprise. And so I think that's a different version of what John was talking about, but I think it's a good example of how the generational differences of life view of the world really impact our decision making, and all the more reason to be very inclusive of multi-generational things. And, you know, I saw the hands raised about an internship, and I do think that word means something different to young people now, and I'm an old person now. I feel comfortable saying that. I have, you know, a teenager and a tween in my house, and they like to tell me what social media is acceptable and not, and DOE does not have any channels in the acceptable category, so that's just one data point for you right now. But to think about how students are approaching the world, how they're thinking about jobs, and I think for my generation and older, the notion of a career and the notion of committing to one thing for a decade or more was a lot more on my mind, at least, than I think what you talk about now, 2 to 3 years, or you know, maybe less, you know, and the idea of mobility and moving out and not being necessarily tied to a regional location. And that was part of the discussion on Tuesday, too, that I'll share, and then I'll stop. So I know we have other questions to get to. But I think that one of the folks felt like that's a selling point, that, you know, you can come and join this field, and there's opportunities all across the country. And maybe you come to Oak Ridge and love it and stay, but maybe you leave Oak Ridge because there's another opportunity in Idaho or Hanford. And that's a strong selling point, and we have a lot of, we've discussed diversity of opportunities in a lot of different fields, and resonating that it is not just STEM. I recognize that. We have huge needs in contracting and legal and HR and cyber and, you know, all of the above. So there's opportunities for everyone, and if you want to stay on the East Coast or the West Coast, you know, work in Carlsbad, it's all there. Maybe your resume gets lost going to Oak Ridge and goes to Paducah again. I suspect, you know, there's something else happening there. But again, it was exciting to be in the room to hear all of these different ideas, because I do think there's so many ways that we could replicate a lot of successful programs and take them and customize them based on the needs of the individual regions and offices and companies and needs that we have across the country.
So next question, I'll go back to Myrna. So how's your organization thinking about succession planning and thinking generally about that, you know, whether it's personnel or knowledge, or so if you could talk a little bit about that.
In terms of succession planning, for the longest time we were talking about succession planning, but we really had not been putting a lot of pen to paper. With COVID and all the different, you know, attrition and different people leaving, you know, there for a while, the folks that were leaving were folks that were about to retire, or very seldom you saw people that were like 20-year career just leaving to go to another job. And we have been seeing a lot of that, folks that we were not expecting to leave, that have gone to other DOE sites or even to the private sector. And that has made us just step back and say, okay, we truly need to identify all these critical positions at the site, so that we start working on ensuring that we know who's the next person that's going to be filling that position once that manager or that person leaves. There's some critical positions. So we have basically developed with the management team a plan that has 3 buckets. Is basically the positions that we need to be ready to fill today if a person is to leave because they're critical. Then those positions that we need to be ready for in the next perhaps 3 to 5 years, and then the positions that between the next, you know, beyond 5 years and 10 years. Our contract is not going to last that long right now. Our contract is up to a 10-year contract. We are in our first option period, and it's supposed to be over in 27. But we're stepping back and looking at the mission for at Paducah, because we do have the DNR workforce. So we want to make sure that we do have a workforce that is ready to execute the mission all the way to 2065. That's the date that, the year that DOE is supposed to be done at Paducah. So just working on establishing, is like short-term, middle, and then long-term, just getting plans in place. So right now we're working on this first phase. We're identifying what action plans we need to put in place to get those folks ready. We have identified the candidates that should be the managers that can take over our job if we were to leave tomorrow, and then identifying what trainings we need to send them. We have also established mentorship, so there's directors working with specific folks in their group to ensure that we get those individuals ready. So that's basically what we're doing. At least we have a plan. We're putting together the action plan to get there, and I think it's a good first step.
Any other
I can
comments?
maybe just add just one thing for me. Succession planning. Not to be overly critical, but I don't know that anybody does it well yet. And when you talk about all the skill sets you're going to need to run out to 2065, it's a big challenge. It's a big problem. I think for me, and I think most companies, you think about management succession and succession planning for your level 1, level 2, level 3 leaders in the company, all the way down from maybe a director level to a fieldwork supervisor. That's our focus. It seemed more dire to me, so that is our immediate focus. Most companies have, they've identified what they call high positives or high potential employees, and they kind of foster their careers in a semi-structured way. But, as I sat here and thought about it, one of the things that has occurred to me, and I don't know that anybody's really accounted for this, since March 24, 2020, and we've been under this hybrid work-at-home model, and as that continues, I think that it's going to be more difficult for us to grow the next generation of leader. Remote work has its merits, of course, we all know that, but there's nothing like being on the deck plates, managing day-to-day problems at a fieldwork supervisor level and then progressive increase in responsibility. So I do think, as if the problem weren't hard enough with succession planning, and then a subset of that is management succession planning. I just think that, and it's obvious, I think most of us have yet to fully realize or conceptualize the impacts of COVID, because it's just going to be the gift that keeps giving at least for another decade. My thought there.
I wanted to circle back. Kristen, you had mentioned about historical black universities. It was an interesting conversation and discussion there. So could you talk a little bit about the EM, Minority Serving Institution Program?
Yeah, it's unfortunate Nicole wasn't able to join us today. She's the best ambassador on this topic, and I know she gets a lot of opportunities to talk about how excited we all are about this program. But for those of you who are not familiar, we had a standing relationship with several minority serving institutions. And as recently as a couple years ago, that level of funding was at about the $6 million level. And in the last appropriation we received from Congress, that level for that program went up to $56 million. So scaling from 6 to 56 is a pretty big increase, and lots of exciting potential there. The goal, I think the main goal of that program remains the same, and that's to build and maintain a well-trained and technically skilled and diverse workforce. And we've all said the need for jobs in those categories, and fighting for workers and finding workers and identifying workers. And so with that upscaling and funding, we're going to really be able to make a lot of changes to that program and build it out and improve it. The program is run out of Savannah River National Laboratory. And so the new activities will go towards some competitive research awards. They recently had a workshop about the first set at Savannah River, I think it was last month. And then, increasing the number of internships that we'll have available throughout the complex. And then starting a graduate fellowship program. So those 3 items will be very helpful. It also includes grants to some other institutions. I know there was a tribal college in Washington near the Hanford site that was also part of this new expansion. So You know, we're also building on some existing partnerships. There will be research at the Savannah River Environmental Sciences Field Station, which is part of the Savannah River Ecology Lab, which if you haven't had a chance to go out there, I know it was featured in USA Today a long time ago because they have an alligator named Stumpy. He's missing one arm. Although it's been a while, I hope he's still alive. And the Ecology Lab is inside the fence at Savannah River. And so it's a great, you know, kind of opportunity for students to get involved with our program and get exposure to our program. And I think for the minority serving institutions, but also across the country, we have been reliant on homegrown talent. And part of that's because we're counting on people knowing that we exist. And there's a better chance you've heard of the Hanford site if you live in the Tri-Cities than if you grew up in Chicago. And so being able to reach other colleges and get a new pipeline of students and more opportunities to share information about our program. You know, I worked at the department for 21 years, several of them in EM. But you know, the kind of conversations you have with other parents on the sidelines when you're at home, if you don't live in one of those communities, there's very little awareness of our program. And so if people aren't even aware of it, then of course they're not thinking about going to work somewhere like that. So lots of opportunities, lots of challenges there. Your question was about the MSIPP program, but bringing it back to that, you know, we're excited about the increased funding and the opportunities there to expand a successful program and make it more successful.
So I'm going to go off script a little bit and ask a question of JJ that we've had informal conversations about. You raised the issue of the oil and gas industry being very competitive with in Carlsbad, and we had a very interesting discussion on similar topics about workforce development in Carlsbad that was hosted by you, and thank you again for doing that. So can you just talk kind of on the ground about this issue of two industries that are competing for the same critical tasks, and what things WIP is trying to do to retain people, and what are the kind of the weaknesses, things that we could try to do better to retain these skill levels.
Of course, you know, one of our biggest issues is our electrician, mechanics, and of course RadCon techs. I know for us, one of our issues, I know personally, I know individuals that have left the RadCon field just for the simple fact is daycare. I mean, we can build our workforce, but if we don't have daycare to take care of our kids, it's hard. I mean, me personally, I went through 4 jobs before I found one that fit my daycare needs with my kids. So that was one of my biggest issues for me and my wife. And I know through some of my colleagues that are here, we're already thinking about or looking at buildings to how do we develop our workforce, but not also our workforce, but how do we take care of our daycare issues that some of our next gens are required. Because I know when I started my family fairly late, you know, I went to college, established my career, and then I decided to have a family. And I'm probably not the only one that's thought about that, but a lot of the issues were around daycare issues. And I know that we've already addressed and found some buildings on where we can establish a daycare, not all establish a daycare, but we can bring in hopefully our contractor and partner up on how we can not allow our individuals to work at the site, but have daycare there as well. And I think that's one of our biggest problems on maintaining our workforce. I mean, that's an incentive. If we have daycare at a workplace, it's like, I'm not gonna go nowhere. I wanna stay there. Where else am I gonna get that and have my kids 10 minutes away or 15 minutes away? So.
Yeah, that was an interesting part of the discussion on Tuesday. I think that, and maybe some of the site folks can correct me on this, I don't believe we have any inside the fence daycare facilities at any of our locations. Besides, there's one at headquarters. But again, and the Savannah River Community Use Organization is in the process of trying to set up exactly that. And again, for some of our site locations, you know, they were selected originally because they were far away from everything. But in this day and age, you know, when we're competing with other industries and these incentives, these benefits, these life choices that people are making, you know, are gonna come down to things like job care. That's a classic example of decisions that people are making as they're selecting jobs moving forward.
And actually, the issue of childcare did come up several times.
Yes.
on Tuesday. So there's certainly there. So let me now turn back to the industry side. How do you balance long-term career recruitment and development effort? And I guess it ties also back to the WIP effort with the project-based nature of much of EM's work, to avoid kind of these short-term booms and busts. So it's kind of the reverse. There's booms and busts on the gas and oil, but there's boom and bust also on the EM side. So if you'd like to make comments on that.
That's a pretty tough question, actually. And so before I take a swing at it, I do want to pile on daycare. I think it's critical, you know, and I'll circle back to this, but as we work even to retool our workforce, which will be part of how I answer this question, we have to help our employees solve childcare. And on the Hanford site, we've pulled together a small working group, including the National Lab and all the prime contractors. We think we've got a pretty good strategy, but the devil's in the details. And, you know, we've got folks from the Port of Benton here and others. So collectively as a community, because I think it's going to take a community, JJ, like you said, to really pull this off, to give us that flexibility. So to answer your question, I think, you know, there's always ebbs and flows in our line of work. There's peaks and valleys, whether it be in how we've planned the work, the nature of the work itself, or whether it be driven by the federal appropriation cycle. So there's just peaks and valleys. And so sort of the classical approach there is that you rely heavily on subcontracted talent. So subcontracted expertise for SMEs and others, but they then begin to resemble like staff aug, and you know that's probably not a good thing. We do rely extensively on the subcontracting community for all of our construction work on site. Everybody does. We do no direct hire for craft labor, traditional craft labor, no direct hire. And that really allows us to ebb and flow, because we just rely on the halls to supply what we need. And when we don't need them, they go back to the hall. Unfortunately, the industry demand for labor is so high, in particular in the Pacific Northwest, all across the country, but in particular at the Pacific Northwest, we can't rely on that predictable source of surplus labor to help us fill in the valleys. So what we've done on the Hanford site, we've actually worked to develop our own and to foster the growth of small private construction companies. They still have the labor challenge, but we now are trying to increase our competitive market. Instead of just 1, 2, 3 companies, we've grown that market now to 8, 9, 10 companies. And we start them small with small scopes of work, very low risk, standard industrial hazards. And then we've seen over the last 5 to 6 years, those companies, not all of them are successful, but those companies that really can step up, they're awarded progressively more difficult, more hazardous work. And so I think, you know, some of the burden really, you know, does trickle back to us to help solve this, because peaks and valleys are just, I mean, they're going to be a reality of they're a reality of the kind of work that we're in. The last point that I'll make, I talked about retooling our workforce. So we thought long and hard about this. You know, if you just look at the demographics of everybody's workforce, you know, you have the folks that have 4-year or more degrees and diplomas. We've got some folks that have associate's degrees, but they fell short of a bachelor degree. We have some folks that post-high school, they had some education but fell short of an AA. And some folks who only have a high school diploma but have always aspired to more. So we want to be in a position where, in the spirit of retooling our workforce, we can foster that desire. And so if we've got an employee who has some college or even associate's degree and wants to go to night school, how can we help them with childcare? How can we help them maybe with a more flexible workplace such that we rely on employees that we know are good, hardworking employees now, but help enable them to grow. So it's a bit of an investment of time. And the last piece, I suppose, you know, companies like ours, it's really difficult to have anything more than a small bench of people who aren't gainfully employed. You know, they're waiting to fill that gap. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, we're incentivized to reduce costs and, you know, advance mission. So we really don't have the latitude to have a bench of folks who are, you know, waiting to fill the peak. But we do have some. We do have some. But I think instead, you know, my answer here is we're really trying to be innovative and creative about how we approach this, but it really rhymes with this is our responsibility to solve, and we're trying to be as creative as we can to grow our own skill sets.
So Myrna, I saw you furiously writing notes on, so I don't know if you wanted to answer this question or.
I'm actually writing notes of ideas that they're really.
Oh, there we go. There we go. You won't.
But in terms, for us, is very similar. You know, whenever we have like, if you have a year that you have many designs, you go to subcontractors rather than hiring folks internally to do that. So it's a matter of the planning and making sure that you have the contracting mechanisms in place. But we do need to ensure that we are working on internships or working with the local colleges and just getting all the different labor categories that we need in place so that we have folks ready to take over as others leave. So, and that's basically what we do.
So we only have about 6 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it back to Kristen. Let's see, which is the harder question to ask you, the ones that have left? This is my last opportunity.
Oh, Heatherly's got a question. Maybe hers is easier.
It's a big deal for us, and I haven't really heard us talk about this enough, and I'm really curious to see what you guys think. So our workforce is becoming more and more millennials, and the trend for millennials is to switch out jobs every 3 years. And let's say that trend doesn't change, and we have a nuclear workforce, and we do a lot of training. If it's not going to change, and we're going to lose these people routinely, what do we need to be doing differently to be able to execute this mission, knowing that we're going to have people who are what we call green all the time? And I don't know that we've wrapped our head around that yet. So just curious if you guys have already started dealing with that and any successes with that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I wish you had helped me come up with questions, because I wish I thought of that. So yeah, so whoever wants to take
Looks like John wants to
take
jump in
that
first.
So it's a great question, and I certainly share your concern. I think you could rely on the standard things where you can incentivize them, you can pay them more money, you can, build a very desirable place to work with flexible work hours. I think tuition reimbursement could be a part of this as they help grow their personal careers and then retool. I'm not sure if that's just going to be a short-term solution or a long-term solution. The other part that we sell, everybody in this room sells it, you really try to inspire the millennials. What's the secret sauce with these guys? and there's a generation that comes after millennials, right? What is it?
Z.
Gen Z. So the problem gets even harder with them guys, right? Because I have two of them. But we wrap ourselves in the nobility of the mission. And so I do think that that's something that we shouldn't necessarily undersell. I do think we've seen selling the nobility of the mission, really closing the circle on World War II and the Cold War, closing that circle and inspiring them to, give back, and it's something that's meaningful work. That's something we're trying to leverage. It's by no stretch the magical solution. I don't know that there is one, but those are a couple of the things that not necessarily novel, but that's a couple of things that we're thinking about.
Well, and that was another theme from Tuesday too, and it was, I think, defining mobility differently, and that, yes, we're all kind of in this together, and if someone leaves a job after 3 years but still stays in our field, and maybe they're at a different site, or maybe they went to PNNL, and then, you coach somebody from PNNL, the goal is to have a pool to draw from, and at this point we haven't cracked that nut yet either. And another very interesting part of the conversation was the role for local communities in being part of that conversation, and being a place where people want to stay, and building the benefits, the daycare, all of those things, and thinking about it holistically, that we all have stakes in this. And it would be lovely if that was the only problem we had left to fix, but it's certainly on the list.
I think we have time for one more question, so and then I'd like to leave.
Just to comment on the last one, I think if you started building employee retention into a ward fee as part of the contracts, you'd have a lot more attention.
So I'd like to, before we end, leave for some final thoughts from our panel. If you had a magic wand or $1 trillion, is that available? What would you do?
One thing that I would say is that anything we do, we need to be intentional in doing that. We need to have a plan, and there's so many good ideas that have been discussed here today. We need to make sure that we start sharing those so that we're not starting from scratch at the different sites. And I know that a lot of communication is going on, and we just need to continue doing that, and just learning from other people's successes and taking those and running with them and just getting it better. But it is a situation that we all are going to have to work together to resolve, because it is real. So
I think about this as Steve Jobs' quick story. So he was interviewing a guy, I can't remember who it was, to be his number 2. He was the CEO of PepsiCo at the time, and Jobs' famous quote was, he said, do you want to continue to peddle sugar water, or do you want to change the world? And if you want to change the world, come to work for Apple. So I think that, as an enterprise here, we really need to push that message, the nobility of our work. We need to think about, more good news stories than bad news stories. We do a good job of telling our story, but we really have to we need them to want to work with us to change the world.
For me, I don't know, I'm a millennial myself, so ever since that question got brought up, I've been thinking, what's actually made me stay? And what's made me stay was a flexibility within my work. I might have changed different job scopes, but I was within the same company, and the company gave me the opportunity to do that. I think that's a big, big motivation, that you can have that flexibility to be able to rotate or move, to not, I say, get bored. Because I guess some millennials always want something new. I know I always wanted something new, and I was always getting bored. So in order to have that flexibility, still maintaining within the industry, but able to flex was one of my opportunities. And then community partnerships. If you don't have the community involved, it's going to be hard to maintain the workforce, just for the simple fact, one can't do it all. We all have to do it together to make it happen.
Okay, you asked for a, magic wand. Somebody mentioned on Tuesday TikTok job applications. I guess those are a thing. I'm sure that would solve all of our problems.
With that, that's thinking outside the box. So with that, please join me in thanking our panel.